Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Amstrad, get real, get Amstrad.
Dans ce cadre, c'est une des idées très concrètes que je formule, cet institut européen pour la formation des imams, pour s'assurer que les imams soient formés en Europe.
Europe is working on a radical plan, a European school for imams. It shouldn't be surprising given what Europe has witnessed recently, terror attacks and beheadings in France and Austria. It will be controversial. It will not be easy. It's long overdue. And we've discussed all of this before. Why and how Europe arrived at this crossroads, how Islamic radicalism took root and thrived. Tonight I want to focus on what Europe should learn from this, not confuse secularism with appeasement. For decades, this continent has sat in judgment of others on how to treat minorities. If any other country had been mulling such legislation, Europe would have rushed to slap sanctions. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss how Europe is learning the hard way and how this has a lesson for the whole world. Also on the show, is the wait for a vaccine over? Pfizer claims a vaccine with 90% efficacy. What does that mean? Stocks soar, as do hopes. We'll tell you all about it. Donald Trump accuses vaccine makers of withholding the good news until after the election. He fires his defense secretary and continues to deny he lost the election. The war is over, the violence is not. Armenia signs a peace accord with Azerbaijan. Some Armenians have declared war on their government for this. And for the first time since the Galwan clash, Prime Minister Modi of India meets President Xi of China in a virtual summit of the SCO. We'll tell you what happened, but we begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat has passed away at the age of 65 after contracting COVID-19. Erekat was the Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization and a prominent spokesman for the Palestinian cause for over 3 decades. Political uncertainty grips Peru after President Martin Vizcarra was voted out by legislators. After being accused of taking bribes and mishandling the country's response to the coronavirus pandemic, the leader said he would not challenge the decision in the court and would step down as head of state. Layoffs in Britain have hit a record high, with the unemployment rate jumping to 4.8% as the coronavirus pandemic wiped out a record number of jobs in the country in the third quarter. Former president and the country's first indigenous head of state, Evo Morales, has returned to Bolivia, ending a year in exile after a close ally and member of his Socialist Party was sworn in as president. A day after Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma refused to convene a party meeting, the party chairman Pushpa Kamal Dahal has called for the party core committee meet. Tensions between the two leaders intensified after Oli met India's raw chief Samant Kumar Goel last month and the party demanded an explanation. India's antitrust body CCI has ordered an investigation into allegations that Google was abusing its market position to promote its payments app. The Competition Commission of India said Google's agreements with some smartphone makers to have the Google Pay app pre-installed might disturb the level playing field. India's capital witnessed its 6th day of severe pollution levels. The blanket of smog reduced visibility to merely 300 meters in the morning, affecting traffic movement. Pollution levels continue to soar as farmers in neighboring agricultural regions set fires to clear their land after harvests and to prepare for the next crop season. As air quality levels worsen, experts say Delhi will witness a surge in COVID-19 infections. Tropical storm Eta is wreaking havoc in Florida. Miami witnesses flooded streets, stranded overturned cars, and widespread closures in several areas. The storm hit the area with maximum sustained winds of around 100 kilometers per hour. 2017 champion Sergio Garcia has become the latest high-profile golfer to test positive for COVID-19 and will miss the Augusta Masters that get underway on Thursday. It brings to an end an extraordinary streak that had seen the Spaniard compete at every single major tournament for the last 21 years. The 40-year-old revealed that he had started to experience symptoms after missing the cut at the Houston Open and got tested on Sunday. He is the second player after Joaquin Niemann to pull out of the year's final major. The NBA is set to return with its new season on the 22nd of December after an agreement was reached between the Players' Union and the league authorities. With the previous season delayed by 4 months due to the COVID pandemic, teams will play only 72 regular season games this season, rather than the usual 82. But some health officials at teams are extremely concerned about injuries, as the 71-day off-season is the shortest break ever across the NBA, NFL, NHL or MLB.
Europe has seen a string of terror attacks in the last 1 month. And here's what it proposes to do now. It's a radical idea. Europe wants to set up a school for imams, an institute to train Islamic preachers and faith leaders in the continent. In fact, it's a threefold plan. 1, train imams at home and certify them. 2, control foreign funding of religious institutes. And 3, shut or scrutinize the open borders. The proposal has come from Charles Michel, the chief of the European Council, the man who leads the body that defines the political direction and priorities of the European Union. He says a European institute should be set up to train imams.
This is one of the very concrete ideas that I am formulating. This European Institute for the Training of Imams, to make sure that imams are trained in Europe, to make sure that the primacy of civil law is accepted.
Does the idea sound familiar? It should, because it's the second time in a month that it has been floated. The first to talk about this was French President Emmanuel Macron. He wants to end the practice of training imams overseas. He wants France to certify imams. He wants a French council to formalize their training. So why does the government of France want to train imams? Because they see it as a way to tackle radical Islam. This is Emmanuel Macron's playbook, and Europe wants to adopt it. The similarities do not end there. The European Council chief has demanded a crackdown on foreign funding for religious institutions. Again, a proposal that Macron has already made. The European Union chief, in fact, said all of this in the presence of the Austrian Chancellor. He was on a visit to Vienna. European leaders are meeting to discuss the bloc's anti-terror response. And the EU chief did not hesitate in using the word terrorism when he raised the issue of extremist ideologies.
The third element I would like to mention, as Chancellor Sebastian Kurz said, is the importance of fighting extremist ideologies, this violent extremism, hate speech, rejection speeches, which are feeding terror actions. It is very important to be firm on that front.
Qui nourrissent cette action terroriste. Il est très important d'être ferme par rapport à cela.
Europe is finally waking up to the threat of radical Islam, and it's about time. An institute to train imams is only one of the many proposals in the works. The European Union wants increased powers to fight Islamism. A report reveals what is on the mind of European leaders. A draft statement has specific instructions for the executive arm of the EU. Promote religious education and training of imams within the European Union. The draft includes the idea of warnings for immigrants and asylum seekers. This is a draft statement for Friday, when Home Ministers of the European Union will meet. Terrorism will now top the EU agenda. For the bloc's December summit, EU leaders will debate the issue of religious extremism. The policy of open borders is also under the lens. And yet again, it is Macron who's leading the charge. He wants Europe to rethink the open border Schengen area. The French president says tighter controls are needed to stop clandestine immigration. He said that criminal gangs are illegally trafficking migrants into Europe. Often they have links to terror networks, so the European Union must take steps to protect itself.
Les attentats que la France a connus.
The attacks that France has experienced, that Austria experienced a few days ago in Vienna, show us that the terrorist risk is everywhere, that networks are globalized, that terrorists today organize themselves globally through networks on the one hand, the internet and social networks, but also by sending agents across borders. This requires Europe to step up its response. France is doing this on its borders by doubling the forces present. Europe must now do so.
Macron recognizes the terror threat, that is a global threat, and not just limited to one country or region. It is time for the rest of Europe to recognize the same, and we are seeing some progress in this direction. Top European Union leaders are discussing the need for a pan-Europe response system. And for the first time since its inception, the EU is putting Islamist terrorism on top of the agenda. Here's a report.
Europe is where history is shaped. It was at the forefront of 2 world wars, where satellite states fought for Cold War supremacy. Today, it is once again heading for battle, this time against Islamist terrorism. The recent attacks in Vienna and Paris were a wake-up call. Europe already has a common market and currency. What it needs now is a common anti-terrorism policy. France is leading this effort. President Macron hosted a special video summit. It was attended by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, European Council Chief Charles Michel, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, and EU Commission Head Ursula von der Leyen. The leaders discussed an EU-wide response to Islamist terror, a robust, centralized mechanism. There are already indications of what this could look like. Border control measures are at the top of the agenda. Macron wants Europe to rethink its open border policy. He wants more protection at the external frontiers, a position backed by the Austrian Chancellor.
Und zum Dritten, there needs to be effective protection of the EU outer borders. Only when we, as the European Union, decide who can come in and who can't, only when we have control over who can come in and who can't, only then will we be able to ensure safe borders within the Schengen area. So this is a critical point.
Coordinated policing is another possibility. Countries in Europe are mulling a new system where intelligence can be shared seamlessly, where security agencies are constantly exchanging information on radical elements. This will be crucial to preventing future attacks.
Certainement, faire en sorte que nos services d'information, nos services de sécurité puissent...
We certainly must make sure that our intelligence services, security services can exchange information in a fluid and permanent way in order to prevent as much as possible these terror actions. We must also certainly try to act on internet platforms to withdraw terror-related content as fast as possible.
Terroristes quand il y en a, c'est le travail qui est mené notamment.
On the 9th of November, EU leaders are set to hold a video summit. Originally, the summit was intended to address Europe's second wave of COVID-19, but terrorism is expected to dominate proceedings. It will be another test of the much-hyped EU solidarity principle. But unlike Brexit or trade, the stakes are much higher this time. In 2001, US President George Bush declared war on terror. 19 years later, Islamist terrorism continues to remain a global challenge. Will Europe's campaign be any different? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Europe is a test case for a very special reason. Europe has always considered itself the avant-garde of secularism. In 2013, the European Union published guidelines on the promotion and protection of freedom of religion or belief, not just at home, but the world over. In 2016, Jon Figel was appointed special envoy for this, for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief outside the EU. That's how seriously they take their role. In 2018 and 2019, Europe sanctioned countries for the way they treated Muslims, mostly for good reason, but also because Europe felt the moral authority and responsibility to tell the world how to treat minorities. As recently as 2020, the European Parliament wanted to discuss India's Citizenship Amendment Act and the removal of special status of Kashmir. It had no business doing so, but the EU, the self-appointed gatekeeper of secularism, wanted to lecture India on the treatment of minorities. Cut to November 2020, Europe itself is rushing to legislate on religion. Come December, France will table a bill that will help the state regulate Islam. It will help the state monitor the funding of French mosques. It will create a certificate program for French imams, and it will ban homeschooling for young children to prevent the creation of Islamic schools or madrasas. Now, we've been tracking the rising radicalism and terror attacks in France, and we understand that this is the need of the hour. But imagine how Europe would have reacted if a country like India had mooted this. If a non-European, non-Western country had planned such a bill, Europe would have cried Islamophobia. It would have sat down to draw a list of sanctions against the country. It would have slapped its leaders with a travel ban, probably frozen their assets. But now terror has struck home, and they've realized secularism cannot be the fig leaf for appeasement. France is legislating to create its own brand of Islam, and in doing so, France does not care if it's being called an Islamophobic country. Europe is finally learning to crack down on terror, and unfortunately, it is learning the hard way, just like the United States did post the attacks of 9/11. Before the two planes crashed into the Twin Towers, America took pride in preaching secularism, even enforcing it elsewhere. In 1998, the Clinton administration created the Office of International Religious Freedom, or IRF, within the US State Department. 3 years later, Washington found itself looking at every Muslim with suspicion. At least 1,200 people were detained by the end of November 2001. In her book, Detained Without a Cause, Iram Sheikh writes that US immigration officials began categorizing Muslims as quote-unquote special interest cases. My message tonight is to the European Union, the leaders of the Western world who for decades have lectured others. You cannot turn your back to terror in the name of secularism. Yes, there are countries guilty of genocide and persecution of minorities. I'm sure we've run more reports on this show on China's Uyghur Muslims than most other networks. China must be called out, even sanctioned. But you can't paint all with the same broad brush. Europe's lectures on the CAA and Kashmir were an overreach. India's tour of European MPs to seek validation on Kashmir even worse. If Europe must compare its own brand of secularism to India's, it should see which has worked. Going forward, Europe cannot confuse appeasement with secularism. It is time to work on the fault lines, to counter terror with all sincerity without making any exceptions. Earlier today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India addressed the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Both Xi Jinping of China and Imran Khan of Pakistan were also part of this summit. The Indian Prime Minister had a message for both these leaders. To China, respect one one another's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to Pakistan, stop raising Kashmir at multilateral forums.
The 20th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has concluded. Like most summits this year, it was held virtually. The leaders had a lot on their plates. The situation in Afghanistan, the Wuhan virus pandemic, and a changing world order after Joe Biden's victory. But the big question was, would tensions between India and China spill over into the summit? The SCO does not permit the discussion of bilateral issues, but indirect potshots are never far away. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping were both on the call. A virtual face-to-face amid a long, drawn-out border standoff. The Prime Minister of India did not mention China directly. Instead, he talked about the need to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
भारत का मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी को और अधिक गहरा करने के लिए यह आवश्यक है कि एक दूसरे की संप्रभुता और टेरिटोरियल इंटीग्रिटी के सम्मान के मूल सिद्धांतों के साथ आगे बढ़ा जाए.
This is also a subtle rebuke of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There are CPEC projects in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, something India has repeatedly objected to. Also on the call was Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Since coming to office, he has tried to raise Kashmir at the SCO, only to be shot down each time. Prime Minister Modi rejected Islamabad's efforts to discuss bilateral issues. He said it was against the spirit of the SCO Charter.
भारत एससीओ चार्टर में निर्धारित सिद्धांतों के अनुसार एससीओ के तहत काम करने की अपनी प्रतिबद्धता में दृढ़ रहा है, परंतु यह दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है कि एससीओ एजेंडा में बार-बार अनावश्यक रूप से द्विपक्षीय मुद्दों को लाने के प्रयास हो रहे हैं, जो एससीओ चार्टर और संघाई स्पिरिट का उल्लंघन करते हैं.
India also reaffirmed its commitment to multilateralism. Prime Minister Modi talked about how the United Nations remains an incomplete organization. He pushed for India's permanent membership at the Security Council. No summit today is complete without talking about the Wuhan virus. SCO was no different. India is the world leader in vaccine production. Prime Minister Modi promised to muster all resources to help produce and distribute vaccine doses globally. The SCO summit was billed as a possible flashpoint, a Modi-Xi face-off. But beyond a few veiled messages, the summit never deviated from its pre-planned agenda. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now to the good news that we've all been waiting for. We could have a vaccine soon. Before you get your hopes up, it could take 1 year, perhaps more, for each one of you to get a shot. But it's almost ready to be rolled out. That's what the makers of the vaccine say. On Monday, Pfizer announced a major milestone. Its vaccine for the Wuhan virus is more than 90% effective. This is apparently a major breakthrough. But some of us were more worried about the remaining 10%. What is 90% effective after all? So we made a list of questions and looked for answers, and here's what we found. Question number 1, what is this vaccine? Pfizer is a global pharmaceutical giant. You must have heard about it. It tied up with BioNTech. It's a German company, and this tie-up was to make the Wuhan virus vaccine. Yesterday, the company said it has achieved the century's biggest medical breakthrough. They claim to have made a vaccine in just 6 months, and they say it is 90% effective.
It's a great day for science. It is a great day for humanity when you realize that your vaccine has a 90% effectiveness. That's overwhelming. You understand that the hopes of billions of people and millions and businesses and hundreds of governments that were felt on our shoulders, now we can credibly tell them, I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel.
So what is 90% effective? Is it a good rate of efficacy? Quite simply, it can prevent 90% of the people from getting the virus. So So what is the recommended rate of efficacy for a vaccine? The US FDA had set it at 50%. So has the WHO, meaning if a vaccine is 50% effective, America will approve it. And the World Health Organization will also approve it. And by that standard, 90% is a very good strike rate. This vaccine has been tested on more than 40,000 people in 6 countries so far: the United States, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and Turkey. Those who got the vaccine in the trial got 2 shots. They showed a 90% protection within 7 days after the second dose. Now, this is the kind of result that the world has been hoping for, a knockout punch to defeat the Wuhan virus. But should you trust Pfizer? Is this vaccine safe? Has it got a safety certificate? Again, the answer, I'm afraid, is no. The company has a long road ahead to get that safety certificate. So while the breakthrough is major, the result needs to be peer-reviewed. Other scientists will have to study and verify it. They will check things like how long this protection lasts, how well it works across age groups, the vaccine, and what are the side effects, if any. So we can say that Pfizer is ahead in the vaccine race, but it hasn't won it yet. Is the trial still on? The answer again is yes. The effectiveness of any vaccine can only be determined in the long term. So even if the trial ends, the studies will continue. So far, the volunteers are not showing any side effects, and that's good news. Also, this research has proved that vaccine development can be fast-tracked in some cases. And now the question we all want answered. When will you and I get it? Well, it depends on where you are and how old you are. If you're under 50 with no medical history, you will be last in the queue. And that holds for any vaccine, Pfizer or otherwise. Countries around the world will prioritize access to vaccines. This is the order of priority. First comes the hospital staff, doctors and nurses, care home workers. They will get the vaccine first. This will be followed by the elderly with serious health conditions. And this could mean mass inoculation will only be possible after 2021. So you'll have to hold on to your mask for several more months. Meanwhile, preparations must begin on how vaccines will be given out. How will they be stored? This may pose a big challenge. Reports say this vaccine needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees Celsius, 70, minus 70. Even in advanced countries like America, major cities do not have facilities to store millions of doses at that temperature. For India, this would be an even bigger challenge.
If you look at, say, India, India has the largest universal immunization program in the world. It can vaccinate 56 million children a year with 400 million doses. But put that into the context of coronavirus and COVID-19 immunization. And if they want herd immunity, you could be talking of having to vaccinate 1 billion people twice. So the numbers are far, far bigger here.
Talking about big numbers, the stock markets are cheering the news. After the Pfizer announcement, its stock hit a 52-week high. Here's something else that's interesting. Even Zoom, the video calling service, felt the impact of this development. Zoom shares, interestingly, dropped 20%. Looks like investors are desperate to get out of the work-from-home mode. Indian markets cheered this development too. The Sensex hit a record high today, zooming up 680 points. So the Pfizer vaccine works. The world is celebrating, but we can't say the same for China. It wanted to win this race. Now, one of its vaccines has triggered a quote-unquote severe adverse incident in Brazil. And the world may not have to depend on an unproven Chinese vaccine anymore. Several other players are making leads in the race, including India. More than 10 candidates are in the final phase of trials. Our next report tells you where we stand in the vaccine race.
The race for a vaccine seems to be in its final lap, with researchers, governments and the private sector working hard to get to the finish line. 52 vaccines are being tested on humans right now. 11 of them are in the final stage of trials. At least 87 other candidates are in the preclinical trial stage, where they are being tested on animals. The Oxford vaccine has a clear lead over most candidates. It is in its final stage of trials. 3 countries and the European Union are now mulling its regulatory approval. The trial so far hasn't thrown up any major red flags. The vaccine has been found safe to administer, including to both the young and the elderly. The same cannot be said for the Chinese vaccines. In Brazil, the trial of CoronaVac has been suspended after a severe adverse incident. This vaccine is made by Sinovac, the state-owned vaccine maker of China. They have injected 90% of their employees and their families with CoronaVac. China has given its unproven vaccines to thousands of people so far without the global stamp of approval. Sinovac was running trials in Brazil. In Sao Paulo, the company had signed a deal to build a facility, a manufacturing unit to produce 100 million doses of the CoronaVac, despite opposition from the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and even the people of Sao Paulo. Earlier this month, they protested against Chinese vaccines. The world knows little about China's trials. Even the details of the severe adverse incident remain unknown. This will only add to the serious mistrust against China's vaccines. Questions are being raised over the Russian vaccine too. Moscow now claims the Sputnik V vaccine is more than 90% effective, just like the vaccine from Pfizer. But Russia's assessment is not based on trial data. Sputnik V is being tested on 40,000 people. But claims of efficacy are based on how the people have responded to vaccine doses. India has stakes in the vaccine race too. The Indian government has backed Covaxin that could be launched by February. The trials so far show Covaxin is effective. Covaxin could be one of the many vaccines to get an early approval if it works. But the supplies may not be enough for everyone to get a shot. According to one estimate, the world will need 15 billion doses to inoculate everyone. With multiple candidates in the race, many players could step up to fill in the gaps in supply. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The United States is celebrating the Pfizer vaccine, but one American is not happy. I'm talking about Donald Trump. The outgoing president of the United States has weaved a conspiracy theory around the vaccine. Trump says the vaccine announcement was delayed on purpose. What for? In a series of tweets, he's claimed that the U.S. Food and Federal Drug Administration did not want Donald Trump to have a vaccine win. So they came up with a vaccine 5 days later. Remember, we've been saying that Donald Trump is displaying all the symptoms of a sore loser. After blaming the electoral process, the mail-in ballot, the Democrats and the counters, Trump is now blaming the drug authorities. He says that Pfizer did not have the courage to announce a vaccine before the election. Trump's deputy Mike Pence jumped on board. He took credit for the vaccine and he thanked a quote-unquote public-private partnership forged by Donald Trump. The Trump administration wants to both blame the drug authorities, at the same time take credit for the vaccine. They're saying that the US government gave money for the vaccine research. Now, Pfizer has rejected that claim. The company says it has an agreement to supply America with vials of the final vaccine, but it has received no advance payment for this. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden's team is having a hard time kickstarting the transition process. The General Service Administration, or the GSA, which manages federal agencies, is not allowing Biden's team to proceed with the transition. It claims that there's been no, quote-unquote, ascertainment on an election winner. But the tally clearly hints at one. Joe Biden's got 290, Trump 240. The winner needs only 270 electoral college seats. Biden has crossed that mark and is far ahead. And Trump, he's far behind, 240. The Transition Authority does not want to recognize the numbers, though. it has withheld funding and access to security briefings and classified information, something that is crucial to the transition process. The question is, can the GSA do this? According to American law, the transition process cannot formally begin until the head of the General Services Administration gives the green light. But the law does not clearly spell out when the GSA must act. The authority has a record of acting promptly during previous elections, with the exception of the year 2000. But 2020 is very different from the 2000 election, the one between George Bush and Al Gore. The numbers clearly favor Joe Biden, but the GSA clearly does not. Now, you'll not be surprised if I tell you that the head of this agency is a Trump appointee. Her name is Emily W. Murphy. She's among the many others who do not believe that Joe Biden has won the election. At a recent press conference, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany echoed the president's call for counting only what she calls legal votes.
Our position is clear. We want to protect the franchise of the American people. We want an honest, accurate, lawful count. We want maximum sunlight. We want maximum transparency. We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be discarded.
Does the Trump campaign have any evidence of voter fraud? Campaign attorney Rudy Giuliani has set up hotlines with the hope that some voters will report fraud. But the numbers have only been buzzing with prank calls. Take a look at this one.
Calling to report some election interference.
All right. What state are you in?
I'm in Arizona.
You're in Arizona? All right. Can you describe the incident?
Yeah, so there's an obese turtle that has rolled over onto its back and is...
It's funny, but it's not. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign has filed another lawsuit in Pennsylvania. It wants to stop the state from certifying Biden's victory. Pennsylvania's Attorney General called the lawsuit meritless, but that did not stop the U.S. Attorney General William Barr from allowing federal prosecutors to probe alleged irregularities in the presidential election. America's top crime prosecutor, Richard Pilger, resigned in protest. As predicted, Donald Trump is using every possible state machinery to overturn the result of this election. The question is, who is funding this legal battle? Some screenshots have emerged on social media of the Trump campaign threatening its donors to cough up cash. One particular email read, "This is your final notice. So far you've ignored all our emails asking you to join us in defending the election. You have ignored Team Trump, Eric, Lara, Dawn, the vice president, and you've even ignored the president of the United States. Tens of thousands of patriots have stepped up for the very first time in the last 48 hours. Why haven't you?" Here's another development. Donald Trump has fired U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. The announcement was made on Twitter, as always, and there was no explanation given. Why does this move matter? It destabilizes an administration that is already stretched between Trump's refusal to concede and Biden's threat to move court over a blockade in the transition process. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the abrupt firing of Secretary Esper is disturbing evidence that President Trump is intent on using his final days in office to sow chaos in our American democracy. Was it not yesterday that we were talking about the possibility of Trump using his last days in office to sow trouble for Biden? To sum up in one line, here's what's happening in the US. The votes are still being counted. There is no official result. But there is a president-elect, and that is Joe Biden. And Donald Trump is not ready to concede. The war between Armenia and Azerbaijan is over, at least on paper. 6 weeks of fierce fighting later, the two sides signed a deal on Tuesday to put an end to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. While Azerbaijan is celebrating, Armenians have declared a war on their own government. Our next report tells you why.
Today on November 9, President of Republic of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, Prime Minister of Republic of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, and President of Russian Federation signed a statement which declares the complete ceasefire and any military action in Nagorno-Karabakh war zone starting from midnight of November 10, 2020, Moscow time.
In the early hours of Tuesday, Armenia, Russia and Azerbaijan signed a deal to end hostilities in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. In a televised online meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ilham Aliyev confirmed the news of the agreement. Nikol Pashinyan posted the news on social media. This truce comes hours after Azeri forces claimed the key city of Sushna, the second biggest city in the enclave in the disputed region. Azerbaijan on Monday also claimed to have taken over dozens of other settlements. Being forced to negotiate because of Azerbaijan's military gains is what has made this deal so painful for the people of Armenia.
In the existing situation, there was no chance of making another decision. I plan to tell more details, why and what was the reason behind the last month's events. I can't do it right now for one simple reason, because stopping military actions are in the main process right now, and if I say something, I can endanger people.
The region of Nagorno-Karabakh has been internationally recognized as a part of Azerbaijan, but has been run by ethnic Armenians since 1994. Since the fierce fighting erupted on September 27th, a number of ceasefire agreements were brokered. However, all of them failed. Armenians lost significant and strategic parts of their territory to Azeri forces over the weekend. Also caught in the crossfire was a Russian military helicopter, which was shot down mistakenly by Azerbaijan, killing 2 crew members and injuring a third. These 6 weeks have led to much loss of lives, destruction and chaos in this region. As per authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh, nearly 1,200 of its defense forces have died. Both sides have accused each other of targeting civilians. Azeri forces have not released their number of military casualties, but have claimed that 80 civilians had died. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russian peacekeepers will be deployed to the front lines. In the prevailing geopolitical context, it is also important to note that Russia has a defense pact with Armenia and a military base there. Russia also has strong ties with Azerbaijan, which has been backed by Turkey. Russia has been selling arms to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Seeing the circumstances under which the deal was signed, as anticipated, the people of Armenia were not happy, to put it mildly. Thousands of protesters gathered outside government buildings in Yerevan, Armenia. In stark contrast, thousands of jubilant Azeris celebrated on the streets of Baku.
God bless all our martyrs. As a result of their heroism and self-sacrifice, we return to our lands. May God heal all our wounded soldiers. Let them recover soon and return to normal.
Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And let's end tonight's show with the story of a brave heart. And I'm speaking quite literally here. This is the story of a human heart. It was harvested from a patient in San Diego, transported all the way to Los Angeles in a helicopter. Now it's safely inside the body of the recipient. But wait till you hear what happened in between.
We've all heard about stubborn hearts. Now it's time to meet one. And no, we're not talking about any individual here. This is an actual heart. It's been in a helicopter crash. It's been dropped by a clumsy medic. But it's still alive and pumping. We'll push the rewind button here for you and tell you what happened. This helicopter was transporting a human heart from San Diego to Los Angeles. Unfortunately, it crashed while landing on the hospital's roof. There were 3 people in the chopper. All 3 escaped without serious injuries. The heart also seemed intact, still viable for a transplant. A rescue worker retrieved the organ from the helicopter. He handed it over to a medic at the hospital. This is where part 2 of the miracle begins. The hospital worker tripped over a metal plate, possibly debris from the helicopter crash. Down went the heart, again! His colleagues came rushing over to secure the organ. You can almost sense the level of concentration here, as they carefully took the package inside. As they say, all's well that ends well. Because this whole scenario could have played out very differently. As one Twitter user hilariously pointed out.
Nurse Henderson to admitting. Nurse Henderson to admitting.
So where is this brave heart right now? The hospital said that it had been successfully transplanted. The patient is also doing very well. After all, how many people can say they are immune to heartbreaks? Bureau Report, we own. World is one.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
C'est bon. Bonne soirée.